being safe allows us to be happier, healthier, more creative, expressive, our best selves. What can we do to make ourselves and other people feel safer? That's sort of the worldview of polyvagal theory, I think. And I like talking about polyvagal theory as a worldview because once you kind of see it, you see it everywhere. And it's worldview, I think, steeped in optimism and empathy more than anything.
Did you know that your dreams will always require your healing? It's true, and that could be why you freeze or shut down whenever you try to move towards your own brilliant creativity. This podcast exists to show you exactly why that is and how to move towards creating the things that only you can. So let's go. I'm Courtney Lancaster, and this is the Heal Create Podcast. Welcome to the Heal Create Podcast. My name is Courtney Lancaster, and I am the host, and I'm so glad you're here because I have somebody who I've been really excited to talk to ever since he agreed to be on the podcast. Seth Porges is a director, a producer, a journalist, and a television commentator. Honestly, you've probably seen him and not even known that you know him already. Most notably, he produced, wrote, and co-directed the feature documentary Class Action Park, which I'm actually really excited to ask you questions about as well. Recently, he co-authored a book with his famous neuroscientist dad, Dr. Steven Porges, all about the polyvagal theory, which you guys already know that I'm pretty obsessed with. The book is called Our Polyvagal World. So I'm so stoked to talk to you. Welcome, Seth Porges.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
I'm so glad that you're here. So I want to talk about how I found you. And it was because years ago, I was really struggling with anxiety and panic and trying to figure out how to heal. I was in talk therapy and not really getting anywhere. And I kept coming across this thing here, like terms like the autonomic nervous system and understanding polyvagal theory, the autonomic ladder. And it seemed like in my deep searches, I kept finding out that understanding polyvagal theory was pretty key to my healing. And it also just struck me as, of what I could understand at the time, a very hopeful view of healing. So I ended up finding probably some late night on Google, like a talk that you gave on polyvagal theory that was so funny and simplified it so much. I've probably sent it to dozens of people over the years because it was the first time polyvagal theory felt accessible and helped me to apply it to my life and really like begin to grasp it, where all of the other books that I had read were really clinical and half finished. So why is it that you decided to co-author this book?
Yeah. I mean, I think I realized the same thing you did, which is that this is really important information that clearly can help a lot of people, but everything that's been written about it, including things my father, Dr. Steven Porges, who came up with polyvagal theory, has written himself, it's just incredibly inaccessible, either clinical, academic, wordy, just like hard to get your head around. And and our goal was to really kind of, polyvagal for dummies, like make something that anybody could understand. Because polyvagal theory, once you kind of strip away some of these like clinical trappings, is actually really simple. And I think it's simple and intuitive because it reflects our lived experiences as humans. I think a lot of people intuitively understand it once you begin to explain to them because they see their own life in it. They see it's like, yes, oh, that explains that. Right? It's not some abstract or foreign concept. And if, in the book, Our Polyvagal World, which is out now, we break it down into just one sentence. So like if you just walk away, throw away the rest of the book, it's really simple. Polyvagal theory, once you throw away everything else, can just be summarized as how safe we feel, not how safe we actually are, but how safe we feel is crucial to both our mental and physical health and happiness. It's really that simple. Our body undergoes this dramatic and massive change based on how safe or threatened or traumatized it feels that impacts almost every aspect of our body, our senses, how we experience the world. It is the lens through which we experience the world. And once you get that, everything just kind of clicks into place.
Yeah. So how would you define trauma? I feel like everybody has different explanations. How would you define it?
Yeah, well, polyvagal theory is it's the thing that's important to note in the way polyvagal theory frames trauma is it's not the event itself, but it's how our bodies and our nervous systems respond to the event. So any number of people, two people, can encounter the same incidents, the same traumatic incidents, and walk away with very, very different impacts from it. One person may walk away and it won't be a big deal to them. Somebody else could relive that experience every day for the rest of their lives. And I think the way we traditionally approach trauma is we're focused on what the incident itself is. And in doing so, I think we're oftentimes very judgmental about how some people may respond if it's different than our own expectations of it might be. We're kind of critical of people saying, like, how can you be traumatized because it was just this that happened to you? Or that's not to the level of true trauma, not understanding that, again, all of us have different resiliences. All of us have different nervous systems. All of us can respond to the same instance differently. And even the same person could respond to the same instance differently based on just how they are feeling that day. And from beyond there, I think the way we talk about trauma is something that basically changes the goalposts for when your body feels safe or not. You know, if you encounter something that is interpreted as severely threatening to your body then creates a series of webs and associations around it where, oh, maybe that smell, somebody who looks like that color, anything, that voice, whatever it could be, kind of gets wrapped up into these webs of associations, so that you're kind of being potentially constantly triggered and your body is constantly made to feel unsafe. So trauma, I like to talk about as an instance that basically changes what does or doesn't make us feel safe in the world around us. And through polyvagal theory, we understand that when we do or don't feel safe, it has just massive impacts again on our health and our happiness.
Yeah. I think I've really stressed my friends out trying to make them understand polyvagal theory and my enthusiasm for it, because I think it's so life-changing when you understand your nervous system. And so how do you explain a basic understanding of your nervous system? You guys do such a good job in the book talking about kind of the traffic light analogy. Yeah.
Well, it all comes down to what polyvagal theory is all about is our autonomic nervous system. And that's a term we've all heard, but I've done this in rooms. Hey, raise your hand if you can define autonomic nervous system for me. And very few people actually can. So it never hurts to go back to the basics. And it's really simple. Autonomic means automatic. So the autonomic or automatic nervous system it's what controls all of our bodily functions that we don't consciously control. It's like our internal autopilot, our robot, right? And so we don't think to ourselves, oh, I want my heart to beat at this many beats per minute. It just does it. I don't think to myself, I want my sweat glands to work. It just does it. Our consciousness controls a very, very small portion of our total bodily function. Most things operate on autopilot, right? Yeah. And what polyvagal theory is about is how that autopilot shifts. It shifts modes. It shifts kind of autopilot software, if you will. And and it shifts us. And the key variable that causes this shift is how safe we feel. And this makes sense because if your body is in immediate life-threatening danger, it needs to put resources into specific bodily systems to evade that immediate danger. We've all heard of the term fight or flight, for example, right? Whereas if your body is not in immediate danger, it is better use of the resources to put them towards long-term health, growth, and restoration. And so your body is kind of constantly deciding, do I put resources towards immediate survival or long-term health, growth, and restoration? Because it can't do both at the same time. And if you constantly feel threatened, your body is constantly de-resourcing the systems that allow for health, growth, and restoration, as well as sociability, creativity, all the things that we love and aspire to do and be as humans. So to be constantly in a state of threat and to constantly have the bodily systems associated with defensiveness, aggressiveness, immediate survival, have all your resources put there, that comes at a very, very steep price. And that price is our literal health and our happiness. It's pretty simple.
Yeah. So you grew up with this your entire life, basically your whole life, your whole family is neuroscientists.
Yeah, my brother too.
Yeah.
so my mom too. Yeah.
Your mom and your dad and your brother are all neuroscientists.
Yeah. It's weird.
That is really crazy. And when you wrote this book, it sounds like it wasn't like you being like, I got to figure out how to explain this. It was just you telling what you know from growing up in the environment where it was.
Well, it was clear just from casual conversations how important this information had become to people such as yourselves for their own journeys of healing. And, it started, honestly, like the process writing this book started with that talk that you saw a video of. It was at an event in New York called Nerd Night. And it's just a series of like people giving talks about things they happen to know way too much about. Could be pop culture, could be history, could be science at a bar. And I was like, let me stand up in front of a bar and just kind of give a talk about this, right? And gave a talk about it, and a video of it popped up online, and it actually went like kind of viral, like 500, 600,000 views, which for this sort of thing is quite a bit. But more importantly, we've seen more importantly, we've just seen the comments on it with people telling me that like seeing that video actually helped them. They were many times saying they were crying, like seeing like just the emotional response. And it was very clear to me that there was a real need for this information to be put into an accessible manner. And that I sort of, at this point, I think had the framework for doing so, which is like, all right, I gave this talk about it. Let's turn that talk into a book. Let's make the book readable. Let's make it concise. Let's not go off the deep end trying to overly explain things. Let's make it something put in language that you as a reader can understand, and then, spread it to other people and talk to other people about it. And so I just asked my dad, we talked about this sort of with, different levels of seriousness over the years. I was like, it's time to do it. I just kind of had, it was the right moment. I had the time at that point while I was waiting for a movie I was working on to be finished. And then from there, the process was actually really quick. I was just like, wow, it seems like I actually have all this information in my head. So dinner table osmosis, I say,
Totally. How many times have you explained this polyvagal theory, do you think, if you had to estimate?
Oh my goodness, I don't even ask me. I mean, like hundreds. Right? It's
You're so good at communicating it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It means a lot. But I think a lot of that came from, the evolution of how I explain it came from explaining it to a lot of people and seeing what didn't make sense to them.
Totally. I can relate to that.
Yeah, like what frameworks, what metaphor, what way of explaining things actually sink in with people, what gets a response, and what doesn't. And from there, you're able to kind of hone it into something that that people understand.
Totally. Well, I can relate to that. I work with a lot of 20-somethings, and I feel really passionate about doing what I can to really give this information to the younger generation. And miraculously, I feel like it's in the zeitgeist. Like we have awareness. People are talking about their nervous systems. They're talking about what makes them feel safe. Maybe less so even than mental health diagnoses and psychiatric labels. And that's like the most exciting thing to me. I can't imagine how exciting that feels to your family that discovered it.
Well, it's weird more than anything. I wouldn't use the word exciting. I would say it's weird. And
is it weird?
It's weird. Oh, it's weird. So like when my dad came up with polyvagal theory and first proposed it in the 90s, he wasn't talking about trauma. Like it wasn't even on his mind. But as it kind of came out into the world, people in the trauma world and the clinical world, they discovered it and they saw it as an explanation for things they were seeing with patients. And the power of polyvagal theory is how many different people from different fields kind of see it and then see it in their own work or their own lives. Like polyvagal theory isn't a modality for treating trauma. It's a model. It's an explanation for how our nervous system works that explains so much. And I think the trauma world really latched onto it because it offers pathways towards healing. It offers explanations of things people have seen in a clinical and a real world setting. And it is certainly informed so much of how trauma is now treated, for sure.
It really has. Kind of almost a new foundation for how we treat trauma as well. Yeah. So you're saying that wasn't his original, even intent in researching it.
Yeah, he first proposed polyvagal theory at a conference. And if you find the original text of the presentation, it doesn't talk about trauma. It basically talks about an explanation for how we as mammals and humans evolved to become a social species, how our nervous system evolved to become social as an adaptation for survival. is what it was. It was sort of an evolutionary story. But through that evolutionary story, you see how we became oriented towards being social and how that orientation became tied into our body's ability to heal itself, our body's ability to grow, our body's ability to restore itself, and how when our bodies felt threatened, both our social features, like literally the muscles and nerves that allow us to be expressive, to speak, to be, nice social people, as well as the bodily systems that allow our bodies to heal, or de-resourced in favor of immediate defense. And that became something that the trauma world really began to latch onto. In particular, not that long ago, people were very dismissive of or ignorant of the idea that fight or flight is not the only way we respond to duress.
Right.
Now I think we all sort of understand that oftentimes people may not activate. They might shut down, they might freeze, they might even pass out. And that's because of polyvagal theory that people begin to understand it, begin to see that as a natural emergent nervous system response. And that is so crucial to understanding trauma, because when we navigate the world assuming that people mobilize and only mobilize as a way of dealing with threat, when people don't, our narrative about what they went through, or people's narrative about what they themselves have gone through, is so inhumane, right? If we tell somebody that there's no sign of struggle, so there wasn't an assault, what are we saying to them, right?
Right, totally. Absolutely.
Yeah, and just that understanding, I think, is so important for changing the way we talk to people, for changing the way we understand people's different responses. And again, polyvagal theory stresses that any number of people can respond to the same instance differently. Somebody might mobilize and fight or flight. Somebody else might shut down or freeze. Somebody else might just go on with their life without really any response. And understanding that is one of the big ways polyvagal theory has really changed the way we talk about and understand trauma.
Totally, 100%. Well, I'm in the creative world and work with creatives and artists, and I'm a singer and songwriter myself. And I told you a little bit before we started that for me, I was singing on pretty big stages in front of lots of people and it was a pretty normal-ish part of my life until my own childhood trauma began to come up, and I had no grid for what was happening. So I was just like, I kept trying to push it down and continue to go on stage, which then coupled the idea that the thing that I love the most is very dangerous, until the point that my body really did shut down. So I had so much anxiety, and I'd be like, I don't have time for this. I have to go on stage and sing these songs. And when it shut down, what I learned through polyvagal theory was when I began to heal and I wanted to come back to my creativity, 100% freeze or totally completely immobilize. I would schedule like songwrites with people, and I would just sit there like flat affect, nothing to offer, nothing to engage. And what I noticed after 2020 was a lot of artists that wanted to come back into performing and touring. I just noticed this because of reading the news and seeing the news, would end up canceling world tours, would end up like so many artists came up saying that they had mental health issues, that they were really struggling after post-pandemic and maybe hadn't realized it until then. And so I think it's been a big part of what I've been passionate about, is helping creatives understand their own nervous system.
Yeah. And, the story polyvagal theory, I think, is one about kind of allowing our bodies to pull a trite phrase here, like to be our best selves, but especially when it comes to things like creativity and artistic expression. Like only when we feel safe does our brain literally get that oxygen and resources that allow us to be as creative and expressive and social and all of these things as we want to be. When our bodies and our nervous systems feel threatened, literally like the cranial functions that allow us to think independently, to be creative, expressive, artistic individuals are de-resourced. And, I think this is a big part of the modern condition, if you will, is we kind of all live in a world in which we're kind of all barraged with signals of threat, whether it's traffic or emails constantly or our phone vibrating or news alerts or cable news. We're just kind of around these signals of threat all the time that kind of constantly make us feel bad. And I think that's tempting for us to be dismissive of that as just simple feelings and not mattering that much. When in fact, what polyvagal theory says is those feelings matter. When we feel threatened, when we feel anxious, we're less able to have fun, less able to be creative, artistic, expressive, social, and basically live good, fulfilling lives. And, you know, in the case of folks like yourself, to be as artistic and productive as we'd love to be.
Totally. Absolutely. I remember reading your dad, Dr. Steven Porges' book, The Pocket Guide to Polyvagal Theory, I think. And he's absolutely incredible. It was still a little bit too hard for me to take in at the time.
Yes.
But I do remember he offered a story where he was going to have a procedure done. Maybe it was a surgery. And he asked for some time so that he could regulate his nervous system. And by the time he went into the procedure, he had felt very like he was able to ground into gratitude and safety enough to feel okay with whatever the outcome of the procedure was. Something that clicked for me was like, he was really talking about living an emergency-free life.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the face of things that are really hard, to be able to ground into like what we talked about. Yeah, like your best self. It is a trite phrase, but it really is like everyone has the chance to do that.
Yeah. And it's interesting you talk about that because the, you know, polyvagal theory, again, like the clinical and therapy and trauma world is latched onto it, but there are a lot of implications in other fields such as architecture, healthcare, aesthetics, design, all of these sorts of things. If you think about, you know, what polyvagal theory implies is that the environmental setting we're in has the capability of making our nervous system feel safe or threatened, and in doing so, making us less able or more able to heal, to be, you know, so if you think about like a hospital where you have a lot of perhaps screaming noises, bright fluorescent lights, feelings of chaos everywhere, are we setting people up to heal or not? You know, you think about schools where similarly, you might have like a lot of like just noise and chaos and bright lights, whatever it is. Are people being best set up to learn? They probably aren't.
Yeah.
And what polyvagal theory, you know, really like comes down to is, okay, if being safe allows us to be happier, healthier, more creative, expressive, our best selves, what can we do to make ourselves and other people feel safer? That's sort of the worldview of polyvagal theory, I think. And I like talking about polyvagal theory as a worldview because once you kind of see it, you see it everywhere. And it's worldview, I think, steeped in optimism and empathy more than anything. I think it kind of tells us that the folks out there who we might cast as our enemies or folks or antagonists or folks who we don't like, maybe we feel they're aggressive, they're probably operating from a place of fear and defensiveness, and that we ourselves might act the same way were we experiencing that as well. And I think, you know, polyvagal theory stresses that we all are kind of the same on the inside, and we're all just kind of dealing with things in a way that's kind of natural.
Yeah, totally. How do you move the goalposts for what makes you feel safe and not? Just give us all the tricks.
Well, let's cure the world right now.
Cure it. Come on, I'm down.
Well, first is to understand this. I think a lot of people are dismissive of either their feelings or other people's feelings as just being this frivolous optional thing. But the truth is that all of our, you know, yes, there are individual differences. There are certain things that may make me feel safe that don't make you feel safe, either innately or based on past experiences. But in general, our nervous systems tend to operate the same way. The same types of sounds, the same types of light, the same types of stimuli tend to either make our nervous system feel safe or threatened. That can be environmental. Like, you know, if I'm playing like loud, crazy metal music, that's going to, you know, activate me. Whereas there's a reason spas play like new age music, you know, there's different warm lighting, different, like those like environmental aesthetics, those things matter. There's been a lot of attention on social media as of late to like ways to hack or tone the nervous system or the vagus nerve, and all these sorts of things. Like, oh, pour cold water in your face, whatever. And that's all fine and good. But what polyvagal theory stresses is that the best, most effective, honestly, most natural way of activating the vagus for healthful purposes and of making our bodies feel safe is through social interaction, in particular, safe social interaction. Being around people who make you feel safe is the single most impactful way of making our nervous systems feel safe. You know, and that's beautiful, you know, like being around loved ones, being around friends and families. Totally. And I think, you know, we all, maybe not all of us, but I grew up in an era in which like things like hanging out with friends was viewed as like frivolous, like recess was being cut at school, you know, like this was an era in which we were told like sit down and shut up in classrooms. Right. And what polyvagal theory says is, oh, actually, like just hanging out with your friends, that's a really important
goal. Yes,
that's the goal.
Right.
That's an important thing.
Yeah.
That makes us feel safe. That makes us happier. That makes us healthier, right? Expressing kindness, expressing love, expressing all of these things. And it's a two-way thing, you know, like social interactions, they involve activation of these cranial nerves and facial muscles. They basically both signal to other people that we are safe, but also take in signs of safety. And it becomes this bi-directional broadcasting of safety between individuals. That's just immensely powerful.
Totally. I want to say that once I saw that video, I kind of began to track some of the things that you were doing. I mean, not in a creepy way, just like I followed you on Instagram. And I saw that you were creating a documentary about this water park in New Jersey.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
That's right.
So the reason why that was really fascinating to me was because I'm obviously passionate about the intersection of helping people feel safe and creativity. So I was interested in your process as a creative with all of your knowledge. And also that documentary is crazy.
Yes.
The craziest. We just were watching it again last night. Like, I couldn't even let my kids see some of it. I have 2 little boys. So I was like, it was like really crossed into like some absolute shenanigans that were insane. Is it okay if we talk a little bit about that?
Sure, of course.
For those that don't know, so it's called Class Action Park. And can you explain a little bit about what it is? I'm laughing because it's like so fun.
It's
and
funny.
Crazy.
It's a funny documentary. No, it's on formerly HBO Max, now Max, the streaming service, and it's about an amusement park in New Jersey called Action Park, which the locals had nicknames for that included Class Action Park, which our movie is called, as well as Traction Park, Accident Park, and that kind of tells you the story right there. It's a amusement park that was simultaneously the most fun place in the world, the most exciting place in the world, but also perhaps the most dangerous place in the world. And those two things very much went hand in hand. People went there not despite the danger, but because of the danger. It became kind of a rite of passage for people in 1980s and 90s tri-state area growing up to go to that park and perhaps get injured and show off their wounds at school the next day. And it was a place that the rides you look at, it kind of scrambles your idea of reality that like that ride existed. You know, you had like a water slide, an enclosed tube water slide that went in a full 360-degree loop. You had things that just seemed designed with sort of a lackadaisical attention to physics, if you will. You have, and then the whole place, of course, was operating under just this, real sense of chaos and anarchy. You know, like people went to the park as patrons because they could kind of get away with doing whatever they wanted, getting drunk and doing things on rides they probably shouldn't be doing, getting into trouble. And, the movie to us was really the story of growing up in this generation and how, we might look back at things with a sense of like, holy cow, that was awesome, while simultaneously going, holy cow, that was really messed up. Sort of how those kind of two feelings really, really can, I think, coexist when we look back at our childhoods.
100%. We all have stories like that. I mean, I was born in the 80s and not a particularly, risk attracted person. We all have stories of like, can you believe we actually survived that? Can you believe that that we were allowed to do that? But this documentary, that was like the point, was risk. And so I actually heard about, do you know the podcast Smartless?
Yeah. It was Jason Bateman and yeah.
So they were talking about it. They were talking about your documentary. Yeah, it was super cool. And they were talking about their experiences at Class Action Park. And I was like in the car, like, Seth Porges made that because I had already been sort of tracking with what you did. So what made you want to go back and kind of like create this, go back? I mean, it was really like a time travel, very 80s nostalgia too in this. Like, what made you want to go back and create this?
Yeah, I went to the park as a kid, but only a couple times. And I had these memories that really just didn't square with my adult version of reality. And you start
what do you
thinking
mean?
back. I mean, it's like, I think about like, oh, did I actually see that? Or is that something that I pulled from a comic book or a cartoon?
Did I embellish?
Yeah, exactly. Did time embellish it? Did my memories embellish it? Did my because when you're a kid, like the lines between fantasy and reality are a little bit blurry. It was hard for me to really square that. And I became really interested in honestly just fact checking my memories. and figuring out like what was real from this, what wasn't. And as I started looking into it, I realized A, there was very little journalism that had been done around this park. It was a lot of just kind of like urban legends. And B, I think a lot of other people had that same experience where they would like grow up, tell their spouses about their experience at Action Park, and people would think they were liars, and they themselves eventually like begin to question their memories. And so kind of the funniest response to the movie I got were people telling me that they like show it to family members, and their family members finally realized they weren't lying about
finally believe them.
Yeah, finally believe them. Yeah. Or showing it to their kids who are like, wow, my dad's way cooler than I thought he was, which was kind of fun. Yeah.
Yeah, you talked about somebody who felt so justified that you made the documentary because she had always told people she lost her finger on a ride at Class Action or at Action Park, and she was like, "You guys, see, I told you." Yeah,
no, that was funny. That in the movie we flash like a newspaper article about a young girl who's like 3 years old whose finger got chopped off on a ride there.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, she was like 3 years old at the time, and that kid, now adult, reached out to me and was so excited to see that because she was like, "Nobody believes me. Like when I tell them I lost it on a amusement park ride." And then she sent me a video of her hand sans one finger, just with this immense sense of pride more than anything about it, which is such a perverse response to everything about that park,
Well, it just goes to show how relieving it is to be like finally believed.
Yeah. And that's what's, the park was everything about growing up in one place, the good and the bad, the tragedy and the heartache. And it's, and it's about how all these things kind of coexist, like to one person on one day, this park could have been this like magical coming of age, rite of passage, this amazing place of adventure and fun. But to somebody else on that same day, it could be the site of the worst day of their lives.
Sure.
If they suffered
most traumatic
injury. Day. Exactly. And all of that kind of coexists. And, I think people probably struggled with the idea of making a documentary about this before because like, how do you tell the story that kind of covers both of those? And I think we realized that like they kind of go hand in hand with that generational experience. That's what the park was. That's what it was to grow up in that era. Yeah.
Yeah. To realize how much trauma we might have actually gone through.
Yes.
Because you know all of this about polyvagal theory and how we feel safe, like, was that difficult for you in certain parts? Because it's such a fun documentary until it does kind of take a shift.
Oh, it takes a shift.
Into like, ooh, this was actually incredibly painful for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, the point, like, the movie has kind of a, not to spoil it, but like a pretty stark tonal shift 2/3 or so of the way through it, where what was presented as fun, I think you begin to recontextualize and understand was actually pretty horrific. And that was sort of designed to mirror my own experience investigating my own memories in this park, where I kind of went into it laughing about it. Like, this is a joke. This is silly. I can't believe this place existed. How crazy is that? Wow. And then, of course, you get to meet people who were traumatized, harmed, or lost family members to the park. And you begin to realize, oh, this isn't really funny at all. And I think, like, to me, the movie began about replicating and mirroring my own experience there, where I was going through that. Like, you can't go in and pretend that people aren't going to find this thing funny and exciting at start, but rather than ignoring that, using that to make the fall towards tragedy and trauma all the starker. If like you're laughing and then suddenly you're not laughing anymore, that's a really strong emotional shift.
Yes. But then at the end, you kind of walk away in the same way that I think a lot of people reprocess their childhoods as adults, where you're like, no, it was fine. Like it wasn't that bad. And then you were like, holy, it was bad in certain moments. Yeah. It was really, really bad. But then at the more further along in your healing, you're like, okay, that happened. And wow, that was wild.
Yeah, I mean, the sentiment we wanted to leave people with wasn't that this place was good or bad. Clearly, it was pretty messed up, honestly. But rather that just because you might laugh about it, oftentimes that laughing is a way of coping, right? And that the people who you're seeing making jokes about this in the film, they're making jokes about it so they don't cry about it, right? Totally, like, just because they're bragging to their friends about something doesn't mean they don't realize it was completely messed up. And that is, I think, such a real sentiment that we wanted to convey. And
Yep.
I think that's justice to the story and to people's experiences.
Yeah, which you did a good job. And just so we're a little bit clear about what this is like a water park. It was created by a guy who basically created his own insurance company, like a fake insurance company, to be able to cover this park, like not legally, but like to be able to.
He broke every rule. He
broke every single rule.
Every rule. Yeah.
Yeah. Run by teenagers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Alcohol abounds. Yeah.
Yeah. It was run by this kind of like genius madman named Gene Mulvihill, who really wanted to create this kind of like libertarian dream park where there were no rules. You could have this crazy time. And if you got hurt, it was, in his point of view, it was your fault. Right. And that was sort of the myth of Action Park that we were bumping up against when we first started making this project, was this idea that people were saying, well, this place is crazy. Yeah. But if people got hurt, they were making bad decisions. It was their fault. And what we found, of course, was a lot of these rides were just fundamentally flawed and dangerous. And a lot of people got hurt. Not safe at all. A lot of people got hurt because of design flaws, or because somebody else in the ride was acting irresponsibly, or whatever it might have been. And that this myth of like personal responsibility was really covering up true, unescapable danger.
Yes, right. Like, I mean, you guys, literally a slide, an enclosed water tube slide that starts at the top of a mountain, has a loop in it like a roller coaster, and shoots you out the bottom. It literally looks like something my 12-year-old would draw. Yeah,
exactly. It looks like the ride literally began as a doodle on a napkin, and a lot of these rides were built by non-engineers, people with very limited, understanding of physics or design, or sometimes people who were kind of like, as we say in the film, on the fringes of the ride design world, who the big parks like the Disney Worlds of the world wanted nothing to do with. These guys would come to Gene and Action Park and be like, here's a crazy idea. And he would be like, let's build it. That sounds like fun. And then see what happens. And he would literally stand next to some of these rides, like the looping water slide, waving $100 bills in the air, kind of urging the teenage employees to be human guinea pigs. And if you went down this experimental ride, you'd walk away with $100 and maybe a lifetime of scars. But yeah.
Crazy. So this is like your first big project, like your first big documentary. Is that true? Like, this is your baby?
It was the first feature film I'd ever made, yes.
Yeah. And was it a great experience? Was it harder than you thought?
Oh yeah, it was great. Like? I mean, I got to work with my co-director Chris Scott, who's a dear friend of mine, and we're still friends. So I think it tells you something about how friends work. No, it was great. We self-produced this film and ended up on a major streaming service, and that's kind of the dream. I think. I don't think that actually happens that often. It kind of feels like your basement demo tape showing up on like a major label. It was a really gratifying and rewarding experience, and it was great because we got to make the film our way, and I think our voices really kind of came through in a way that if you're making a film from the get with like a big streamer, maybe things will be softened or homogenized or whatever it might be, and I think the movie kind of came out as very raw and real from our point of view, in a way that I think people really responded to.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you one last question. It was something I heard you say on an interview about this in relation to polyvagal theory. You talked about how, I might get the facts wrong, but it was something about how you used your own funding, or there were a couple of different circumstances that you made this documentary that made you feel some fear, that you were like, okay, like we're going to do this. It wasn't like backed by a major company. And because of that fear, you feel like you were able to put forth like some of your best work. Is that a correct way to say that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's a lot of fear when you are putting your own energy, time, money, everything on the line. You're taking, I a huge personal, financial, and professional risk is the truth of it.
That was it. That was what you said.
Yeah. Do I think that fear really drove? I don't really think fear drove it here. I think arrogance did. Thinking to myself, I can do this, which is sort of a stupid idea. Yeah. It's sort of delusion, delusion. Like that's what drove it more than anything. Yeah. And then when you're done and you're like, all right, now how do we actually get this out? That's when fear happens. But I think that, but that point, you're kind of done with the creative part of the project. Yeah.
So maybe not like that fear drove you creating this, but it really like added some energy. And I was thinking from a polyvagal standpoint, what is creativity? Like if I'm trying to help myself feel as safe as possible in order to create, if I'm honest, there is a little bit of fear there or risk when I'm creating. So I'm like, is it a blended state? Is it like...
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like fear, if it doesn't shut us down, is going to activate us and mobilize us. And, I think what's clear, going back to polyvagal theory, is I think, these defensive states, none of them are bad. Like there's no morality to them, right? They're there to keep us alive. The problems are when they're overused, when we're stuck in them. And things like being mobilized, being fight or flighty, being activated, we call it the sympathetic nervous system. That state, of course, exists when we're in states of fear, but it's really important that we're able to access that so we can survive. And a lot of, you use the term blended state, there are a lot of instances when that state is activated when we're not fearful. And that is part of, perhaps when we're playing with friends, playing a game of basketball, you're dancing, those sorts of things. The autonomic state of play, we call it. And polyvagal theory sort of posits that state itself is a neural exercise. It's basically the body and the nervous system practicing the ability to move in and out of this state of activation without getting stuck in it. So you look at dogs or children who instinctively play, they're exhibiting a number of traits associated with activation, with fight or flight. They're running around, they're playing tag, they're chasing each other, or whatever, but they're doing it in a safe social context. And so the systems of safety and fear are kind of being activated together. And the idea there we would posit is that this is the body exercising the ability to move in and out of the state without getting stuck in it. And so you look at, again, like schools cutting recess, people saying that playing with friends as kids or even as adults might be frivolous or unnecessary. Polyvagal theory posits it's actually a really, really important part of our nervous system exercising its ability to be resilient, to kind of handle the stresses of the world without getting stuck there.
Totally. So creativity or play is a mostly ventral experience, mostly a green light experience with like a splash of...
Well, creativity for sure. Play is, I think, a pure blended one. Like you're playing a game of basketball, it's highly physical, right? You're dancing with your friends, it's highly physical. Competition, highly physical, but it's done in the state of safety, hopefully. And And exactly. But creativity where you're like, hey, at a desk, I'm writing, I'm playing music, that's way more, as you call it, a ventral experience.
Yeah. Crazy. Okay. I love it. Thank you so much for coming today.
Anytime.
I loved talking about all of this. It's been fun to like follow you along and just see what you're doing. The book is called Our Polyvagal World. And you guys, I just read it this week. It's such an easy read and such a hopeful read, such a great resource for understanding your nervous system. So go out and get it today. Seth, thank you so much again.
I appreciate it.
All right, guys, have a good day. See you next time.